Leave it, Sam. That tag's not yours." The words cut through the smoky haze of Steelworks Bar like a blade through silk. Sam Morrison's boot hovered inches above the battered dog tag that had skittered across the scarred wooden floor, its metal surface catching the neon beer sign's bloody glow. The engraved numbers 6184Z50 sign seemed to pulse in the dim light. Riley Mason sat frozen in the corner booth, her black-gloved hands pressed flat against the table. At 33, she had perfected the art of invisibility, but now every eye in the bar was fixed on her. The silence stretched taut as piano wire. Sam's 3 buddies flanked him, their fresh army uniforms still crisp with parade ground starch. They'd been drinking since sunset, their laughter growing sharper with each round, their voices louder as they spotted the lone woman who never spoke to anyone. "What are you hiding, Mason?" Sam's voice dropped to a harsh whisper, his heels still threatening the dog tag. "Or is that all you have left?" Riley's eyes, steel gray and hollow as spent shell casings, lifted to meet his. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Her voice, when it came, carried the weight of distant thunder. "Don't." The single word hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. What secrets had this woman buried beneath those black gloves? What ghosts haunted the silence she wore like armor? Even the jukebox seemed to hold its breath. In that frozen moment, no one could have predicted that this confrontation would unearth a truth that would shatter everything Sam Morrison thought he knew about his family. The tension stretched between them like a tripwire, but the moment Riley spoke, something shifted in the bar's atmosphere. This wasn't just another weekend confrontation between cocky young soldiers and a local. This was something deeper, older, carved from shadows that most people spent their lives trying to avoid. Riley Mason had been coming to Steelworks Bar every Friday night for 3 years. She always chose the same corner booth, always ordered bourbon neat, always kept her hands gloved even in the stifling summer heat. The regulars had learned not to ask questions. There was something about the way she held herself, like a loaded weapon with the safety off, that discouraged casual conversation. Jake Hendricks was the closest thing Riley had to a friend, a grease-stained mechanic who recognized the weight she carried because he'd carried his own. He'd been trying to draw her out for months, sensing the familiar darkness that settled in the spaces between words. "You still haven't heard from Cross?" Jake asked quietly, sliding into the booth across from her earlier that evening, before the soldiers arrived. He'd seen her pull out her cracked phone again, staring at the same old team photo she kept as her wallpaper. Riley's fingers had traced the edge of her dog tag through her jacket pocket, a habit she'd developed over the years. "Some stories aren't for telling, Jake." The dog tag's weight pressed against her ribs through the fabric, a constant reminder of promises kept and prices paid. The photo on her phone showed 5 soldiers in desert camouflage, their faces young and confident, arms slung around each other's shoulders. Riley stood in the center, her smile genuine in a way it hadn't been for years. To her left was Cross, Marcus Cross, with his infectious grin and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he laughed. Behind them, barely visible in the background blur, stood another figure. Someone whose face Riley remembered better than she cared to admit. "Operation Silent Dagger," Jake had pressed gently. "You never told me what really happened out there." Riley had closed the phone with a soft click, the screen going dark. For a moment, her composure cracked just enough to let Jake see the ocean of pain beneath. Then the walls went back up, solid as reinforced concrete. "Some stories," she repeated, her voice barely audible over the bar's ambient noise. aren't for telling. That's when the laughter started. Sharp, cutting laughter from the group of young soldiers who'd been eyeing her all evening. They'd been drinking liquid courage, building up to something, and now they were ready to make their move. The memory hit her like incoming artillery. The crack of gunfire, radio static, her own voice screaming Cross's name into the endless desert wind. Then she was back in the neon gloom of Steelworks Bar, watching Sam Morrison's boot hover over the only piece of Marcus Cross she had left to hold on to. The laughter grew sharper, more predatory. Sam's friends spread out around the booth like wolves circling wounded prey, their movements loose with alcohol and bravado. The other bar patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the electricity in the air, but unsure whether to intervene or simply look away. "Come on, lady," Sam said, his voice gaining confidence as his friends flanked him. "We're just having a conversation here. No need to get all dramatic about some old piece of metal." Riley's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She'd spent 3 years perfecting the art of being invisible, of letting insults and stares roll off her like water off steel. But the dog tag lying vulnerable on the floor changed everything. That wasn't just metal. It was memory, responsibility, a promise she'd made in the desert sand with her hands covered in blood. "Pick it up," she said quietly, her eyes never leaving Sam's face. "Pick it up and hand it back." Instead, Sam crouched down and snatched the dog tag, holding it up to the light. His friends laughed as he squinted at the engraved numbers, performing for his audience. 6184Z509. What's this supposed to be? Some kind of secret code? You military types love your little mysteries. The words hit Riley like a physical blow. She could feel her control starting to fracture, could taste the copper of adrenaline on her tongue. The bar around her began to fade, replaced by the endless expanse of Afghan desert, the weight of a rifle in her hands, the sound of helicopters that never came. "Cross, do you copy? Cross, respond!" Her own voice echoed across the years, desperate and raw. "I've got eyes on your position, hold tight." "You act like you're some kind of hero," Sam continued, oblivious to the storm building behind Riley's eyes. He dangled the dog tag between his fingers like a toy. "But look at you. Sitting alone in a dive bar, drinking yourself stupid every weekend. Real heroic." Jake started to rise from his seat at the bar. "Sam, that's enough. You don't know what you're—" "Stay out of this, old man." One of Sam's friends cut him off. "This is between us and the Ice Queen here." Riley's hands were shaking now, the tremor barely visible but growing stronger. She could smell cordite and diesel fuel, could feel sand grinding between her teeth. The flashback was coming whether she wanted it or not, dragging her back to the day everything went wrong, the sandstorm. Cross's voice on the radio, tight with panic. "Contact! We're taking heavy fire!" Riley had abandoned her overwatch position, sprinting toward the gunfire as bullets whined past her ears. "Heroes don't need to say a word," Riley said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her head. She stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. "They just do what needs doing." Sam laughed, but there was less confidence in it now. Something in Riley's tone, in the way she held herself, was setting off alarm bells even through his alcohol-fogged brain. "Yeah? And what exactly did you do, besides survive while better soldiers didn't?" The words were like a knife between the ribs. Riley's vision tunneled, the bar fading until all she could see was Sam's smirking face and the dog tag swinging from his fingers. She took a step forward, then another, her movements predatory and precise. That's when Jake noticed the numbers on the dog tag for the first time. His face went pale, his beer forgotten as he stared at the metal disc in Sam's hand. "Sam," he said urgently. "Sam, look at the numbers again. Look at them carefully." But Sam was too caught up in his performance to listen. He held the tag higher, squinting at it in the dim light. 6184Z09. So what? It's just some... Wait, these numbers, they look familiar? Sam's voice trailed off, his face draining of color. His hands began to shake as memories flooded back. Marcus showing him his dog tags before deployment, making him memorize the numbers just in case. The same numbers he'd traced with his finger on the memorial wall. He stopped mid-sentence, his face going white as the blood drained from his cheeks. The laughter died in his throat as the numbers finally registered, as memory and recognition crashed together like colliding freight trains. From the shadows near the pool table, a figure stepped forward. He was older than the others, maybe 50, with gray threading through his dark hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of too many years in too many hard places. His movements were economical, purposeful, and when he spoke, his voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Careful, son," the man said quietly, his eyes fixed on Sam with laser intensity. "Some stories are written in blood." Riley's head snapped toward the voice, her breath catching in her throat. She knew that voice, had heard it barking orders over radio static and whispering encouragement during the longest nights of her life. "Torres," she whispered, the name falling from her lips like a prayer. The desert dust seemed to fill her lungs again, the weight of Marcus Cross's body heavy in her arms, Torres's voice cutting through the chaos of that terrible day. Master Sergeant Eduardo Torres stepped fully into the light, and Riley felt the ground shift beneath her feet. He looked older, lines carved deeper around his eyes, but the bearing was unmistakable. The same man who had trained her, who had recommended her for Delta Force, who had been there the day everything changed. "Hello, Riley," Torres said softly, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent bar. "It's been a long time." Sam's hand was trembling now, the dog tag swaying like a pendulum between his fingers. The numbers seemed to burn in the neon light. 6184Z509, his brother's service number, his brother's identification. His brother who had died 3 years ago in a place called Silent Valley, in an operation the Army had classified so deep that even the casualty reports were redacted. This is Marcus's tag," Sam whispered, his voice barely audible. "But why do you?" Riley's world tilted on its axis. She stared at Sam Morrison, really looked at him for the first time. The jawline was different, softer, but the eyes were the same. Those same bright blue eyes that had looked up at her from a hospital bed in Germany, full of trust and determination, promising he'd be careful, promising he'd come home. "Cross," she breathed, the pieces falling into place with devastating clarity. "You're Marcus's little brother. Sammy. He talked about you all the time." The fight went out of Sam like air from a punctured tire. He sank into the booth across from Riley, the dog tag clutched in his shaking hands. He said he served with the best soldiers in the world. Said his team leader was someone special, someone who'd never leave anyone behind. Torres moved closer, his presence filling the space between past and present. "Operation Silent Dagger," he said quietly. January 15th, 3 years ago, Riley's team was providing overwatch for a high-value target extraction in the Kunar province. Intelligence said it would be a clean op. Get in, grab the package, get out. Riley's hands pressed flat against the table, her knuckles white beneath the black leather gloves. The memory was coming whether she wanted it or not, dragging her back to the worst day of her life. "The sandstorm wasn't on the weather reports," she said, her voice hollow. "It came out of nowhere, turned day into night in seconds. We lost comms with command, lost GPS, lost everything." Torres nodded grimly. The extraction team was compromised before they hit the ground. Taliban fighters had been watching the target location for weeks, waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. Sam looked up at Riley, and for the first time she could see Marcus in his face. The same stubborn set to his jaw. The same refusal to back down, even when the odds were impossible. "What happened to my brother?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Riley closed her eyes, and she was back in the desert, tasting sand and fear, hearing the crack of AK-47s echoing off the canyon walls. The ambush was perfectly orchestrated. Cross's team pinned down in the riverbed, no cover, no way out. Riley abandoned her overwatch, sprinting across open ground as bullets whined past her ears. When she reached them, Marcus was already down, blood spreading across his chest plate. "He was hit in the first 30 seconds of the ambush," Riley said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sniper round, center mass. His armor caught most of it, but..." She pulled off her right glove with trembling fingers, revealing a network of scars across her palm and wrist. Old burns, healed but never forgotten. "The helicopter couldn't land in the storm. I had to carry him out. 2 miles through enemy territory, with Taliban fighters closing in from 3 directions." Sam stared at the scars, understanding dawning in his eyes like a terrible sunrise. "You carried him out," he said. "You brought him home." "I tried," Riley whispered, and the weight of those 2 words seemed to crush the air from her lungs. "God help me, I tried. But he was hurt too bad, lost too much blood. He died in my arms 20 minutes before the medevac finally reached us." The bar was completely silent now. Every conversation stopped, every glass forgotten. Even the jukebox seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, its mechanical hum the only sound in the sudden stillness. Torres reached into his jacket and pulled out something small and tarnished. A unit badge, worn and battered, with the distinctive lightning bolt of Delta Force barely visible through years of wear and weather. "This belonged to Marcus," he said quietly, placing it on the table between Riley and Sam. "He asked me to make sure it found its way to the right person if anything ever happened to him." Riley stared at the badge, her vision blurring. "He died because of me," she said, the words torn from some deep place inside her chest. "I was supposed to be watching their 6. I was supposed to keep them safe." "No," Torres said firmly, his voice cutting through her self-recrimination like a blade. "He died because he was a soldier, doing his job, protecting his country and his brothers. Just like you were doing yours when you left your position to save him." Sam looked up at Riley, tears streaming down his face. "He wrote to me about you," he said softly. "Called you the best soldier he'd ever served with. Said you had his back no matter what." The dog tag seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds in his hands. After he died, I thought maybe if I joined up, if I proved myself, I could somehow, I don't know, make it mean something. And instead you ended up harassing the woman who tried to save his life," Jake said quietly from across the bar, his voice heavy with understanding. The weight of revelation settled over the bar like a shroud. Sam stared at the dog tag in his hands as if it might burn through his skin, while Riley sat frozen, her scarred hand still exposed, telling its own story of sacrifice and loss. Torres moved closer to the table, his weathered face grave with the weight of memory. "There's more to the story," he said quietly. "More than what made it into the official reports." Riley's head snapped up, her eyes wide with something between hope and terror. "Torres, don't!" "She needs to hear this, Riley. And so does he." Torres gestured to Sam, who was clutching his brother's dog tag like a lifeline. "The extraction point was compromised from the start. We found out later that the Taliban had been feeding our intelligence sources false information for weeks, setting up the perfect trap." The older soldier's voice carried the authority of someone who had seen too much, lost too much, but never stopped fighting. When that sandstorm hit and Riley lost contact with command, she had a choice. She could have stayed in her overwatch position, followed protocol, waited for backup that might never come. Sam looked up at Riley, his young face streaked with tears. But she didn't. "No," Torres said firmly. "She didn't. She saw her teammates in trouble and she did what any good soldier does. She ran toward the danger, not away from it." Riley's voice was barely a whisper. "I was too late." "You were exactly where you needed to be," Torres replied, his tone brooking no argument. Marcus Cross died in the arms of someone who cared about him, someone who risked everything to bring him home. Do you know what his last words were? Riley shook her head, unable to speak. Torres reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. "I debriefed every survivor of Silent Dagger, including you, though you were in no condition to remember much of it." He flipped through pages of careful handwriting until he found what he was looking for. According to Corporal Williams, who was providing rear security, Marcus Cross regained consciousness briefly while you were carrying him out. He looked up at you and said, "Tell Sammy I kept my promise. Tell him his big brother never forgot." Sam's breath caught in his throat. Those words, he'd heard them before, whispered in a hospital room in Germany when Marcus was preparing for deployment. "I'll always watch out for you, Sammy, even from far away." The promise that had haunted Sam's dreams for 3 years. The words hit Sam like a physical blow. He doubled over in the booth, his shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. He promised. Before he deployed, he promised he'd always watch out for me, even from far away. Riley's composure finally cracked. 3 years of carefully maintained walls crumbled all at once, and the grief she'd been carrying like a stone in her chest came pouring out. "I should have been faster," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I should have seen the ambush coming. I should have—" "You should have done exactly what you did," Torres interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "You carried a wounded soldier 2 miles through enemy fire. You performed CPR for 20 minutes while taking sporadic sniper fire. You brought Marcus Cross home to his family when you could have saved yourself." Sam looked up at Riley through his tears, and for the first time since the confrontation began, she saw not anger or mockery in his eyes, but something else entirely. Gratitude, recognition, the beginning of understanding. "You brought my brother home," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Even though it cost you everything." Riley wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving streaks on her cheeks. "It didn't cost me everything," she said quietly. "It cost me enough." Torres placed his weathered hand on the table between them. "Riley Mason," he said formally, his voice carrying the weight of official recognition. "For your actions during Operation Silent Dagger, for your unwavering commitment to the warrior ethos of leaving no one behind, and for your continued service to your brothers and sisters in arms even after leaving the military." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. "The Army couldn't give you this officially. Too many classified details, too many political considerations. But your teammates could. We pooled our resources, called in some favors, and had this made." He opened the box to reveal a simple bronze medal inscribed with the words "Silent Guardian" and the date of Operation Silent Dagger. Below it, in smaller letters, were the names of every soldier who had served on that mission, including Marcus Cross. "This is from all of us," Torres said quietly. "From every soldier who came home because of what you did that day." Riley stared at the medal, her hands trembling. "I don't deserve—" "Yes," Sam said firmly, standing up from the booth. His face was still streaked with tears, but his voice was steady now, filled with a conviction that reminded Riley powerfully of his brother. "Yes, you do." He held out the dog tag, offering it back to her. "This belongs to you now. You earned it." Riley looked at the tag, then at Sam, then at Torres. For 3 years, she had carried the weight of failure, the crushing burden of survivor's guilt. She had convinced herself that she was nothing more than a broken soldier who had failed when it mattered most. But looking at Sam's face, seeing Marcus's eyes looking back at her with gratitude instead of accusation, she began to understand something that had eluded her for years. She hadn't failed. She had done exactly what a soldier is supposed to do. She had run toward the danger, not away from it. She had kept her promise to never leave a fallen comrade behind. She had brought Marcus Cross home. Riley's fingers closed around the dog tag, and for the first time in 3 years, the weight of it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a promise kept, a bond honored, a brother remembered. Around them, the bar had transformed from a place of confrontation into something approaching sacred ground. The other patrons watched in respectful silence as Sam Morrison stood and, with movements that carried the precision of military training, brought his right hand to his forehead in a crisp salute. "Sergeant Riley Mason," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed space. "Thank you for bringing my brother home." The simple gesture broke something open in Riley's chest. Not the painful crack of old wounds, but the gentle opening of something that had been closed too long. She rose slowly from the booth, her movements deliberate and sure, and returned the salute with the same precision she had learned all those years ago. "It was an honor to serve with him," she said, her voice steady now, clear and strong. "Marcus Cross was one of the finest soldiers I ever knew." Jake, who had been watching from the bar with tears in his eyes, began to clap. Slow, measured applause that spoke of respect rather than celebration. One by one, other patrons joined in, until the entire bar was filled with the sound of recognition, of honor given where honor was due. Torres stepped forward and pinned the bronze medal to Riley's jacket, his movements formal and reverent. "For services rendered above and beyond the call of duty," he said quietly. "For bringing our brothers home." But it was what happened next that truly changed everything. From a corner booth near the back, an elderly man with a Vietnam veteran's cap stood up, his arthritis-gnarled hands bringing themselves to attention in a salute that carried the weight of decades. Other patrons throughout the bar began to stir, sensing the shift in atmosphere. A woman with calloused hands touched the faded Marine Corps tattoo on her forearm. A man in work clothes reached instinctively for the unit patch hidden in his wallet. Then a woman at the bar, a Navy veteran, judging by her anchor tattoo, rose and followed suit. One by one they rose, each carrying their own invisible wounds, their own memories of brothers and sisters who didn't make it home. The salutes weren't just for Riley, but for every promise kept, every soldier carried, every family notified. Riley looked around the room, seeing faces she had passed by for 3 years without really noticing, recognizing now the shared understanding in their eyes. These weren't just strangers sharing a drink in a dive bar. They were family, connected by service and sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of military life. "I never knew," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. "I never realized how many of us there were." Torres smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "We've been here all along, Riley. We've been waiting for you to be ready to see us." The salutes gradually lowered, but the atmosphere in Steelworks Bar had fundamentally shifted. What had begun as a place of isolation and quiet desperation had become something else entirely. A sanctuary, a gathering place for those who understood the weight of service and the price of freedom. Sam Morrison wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, his earlier bravado completely gone, replaced by something deeper and more genuine. "I owe you an apology," he said to Riley, his voice thick with emotion. "I came in here thinking I was some kind of hotshot, thinking I understood what it meant to be a soldier." Riley shook her head gently. "You don't owe me anything, Sam. You were hurting, and you didn't know where to put that pain. I understand that better than you might think." The young soldier looked around the bar, seeing it with new eyes. "Is this what it's like? After you get out, I mean. Do you all just carry it alone?" "Not anymore," Jake said, sliding over to join their conversation. His mechanic's coveralls were stained with grease and honest work, but his eyes held the same understanding that Riley had seen in Torres's face. "We've all been carrying our own pieces of the war, thinking we were the only ones who couldn't figure out how to put them down." He paused, his voice growing quieter. "I spent 2 tours in Iraq as a mechanic. Lost 3 friends to an IED on my last convoy. Been fixing engines ever since. Trying to fix something that actually stays fixed." Torres nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The thing about trauma, about loss, is that it makes you think you're alone. It convinces you that no one else could possibly understand what you've been through." He gestured around the room. "But look around, Riley. Look at all these faces. Every one of them has a story. Every one of them has carried weight they thought would crush them." An older woman approached their table, the Navy veteran Riley had noticed earlier. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes held the kind of steady strength that comes from weathering life's worst storms and still choosing to keep going. "Petty Officer First Class Maria Santos retired," she said, extending her hand to Riley. 22 years in the Navy, including 3 deployments to the Persian Gulf. I've been coming to this bar for 5 years, and I never had the courage to introduce myself to anyone." Riley shook her hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of years of hard work. "Why tonight?" Maria smiled, her expression warm and genuine. "Because tonight, someone showed us that the weight we've been carrying alone doesn't have to break us. You didn't just carry Marcus out of that desert, Riley. You carried hope for all of us who thought we'd lost it." More veterans began to approach. A former Marine who worked construction, an Air Force veteran who drove trucks, a Coast Guard retiree who ran a small fishing charter. Each one had a story. Each one had been sitting in Steelworks Bar for months or years, drinking alone, carrying their memories in silence. "We should do this more often," Jake suggested, his voice gaining enthusiasm. "Get together, I mean. Talk about things. Support each other. Torres pulled out his phone, his fingers moving with surprising speed across the screen. There's a VFW post about 10 miles from here that's been struggling to keep its doors open. Maybe we could help with that. Give this community something more than just a place to drink away the memories. Sam looked around the group, his young face serious with newfound purpose. Could I? I'm still active duty, but could I be part of this? I want to understand. I want to honor what my brother died for. Riley reached across the table and placed her hand on his arm. Marcus would be proud of you, Sam. Not because you joined the army, but because you're willing to learn, willing to grow, willing to become the kind of man who brings people together instead of tearing them apart. The bartender, a gruff man named Eddie who had been silently polishing glasses throughout the entire confrontation, suddenly spoke up. "First round's on the house," he announced, his voice gruff with emotion. "For our heroes." Eddie had served 2 tours in Vietnam, though he'd never spoken of it until tonight. The Purple Heart he kept hidden in his office drawer suddenly felt less like a burden and more like a bridge to understanding. A cheer went up from the assembled veterans, but it wasn't the rowdy celebration of earlier in the evening. This was something deeper, more meaningful, the sound of people who had found their tribe, their place of belonging. Riley looked around at the faces surrounding her, feeling something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope of someone drowning, but the steady, sustainable hope of someone who has finally found solid ground. "Thank you," she said quietly, her words directed at all of them and none of them in particular. "For the first time in a long time, I don't feel alone." Torres raised his beer in a toast. "To Marcus Cross," he said solemnly, "and to all our brothers and sisters who didn't make it home. May their sacrifice never be forgotten, and may their memory inspire us to be better than we were." "To Marcus Cross," the room echoed, glasses raised in tribute to a soldier who had died far from home, but whose legacy lived on in the hearts of those who remembered him. The night air was crisp as Riley stepped out of Steelworks Bar, the bronze medal still pinned to her jacket catching the first pale light of dawn. The confrontation that had begun in anger and misunderstanding had transformed into something she never could have imagined. A homecoming she didn't even know she needed. Sam Morrison caught up with her on the sidewalk, his steps quick but respectful. "Riley, wait." She turned, and in the growing light, she could see Marcus more clearly in his younger brother's face. The same determined jawline, the same eyes that refused to give up even when the odds were impossible. "I want you to keep this," Sam said, holding out the dog tag. "It belongs with you. Marcus would want you to have it." Riley looked at the battered piece of metal, seeing not just the engraved numbers but the weight of memory, the bond of brotherhood, the promise that no one gets left behind. She closed her fingers around it, feeling its familiar weight settle into her palm like a missing piece of herself finally returned. "Thank you," she said simply, "for helping me remember who I used to be." Sam smiled, and for a moment Riley could see the boy Marcus had talked about so often, the little brother who looked up to him, who made him laugh with terrible jokes, who gave him a reason to fight his way home from every mission. "He used to say that the best soldiers weren't the ones who never fell down," Sam said quietly. "They were the ones who got back up, no matter how many times they hit the ground." Riley nodded, understanding flooding through her like sunrise after the longest night. "Your brother was a wise man." Behind them, the other veterans began filing out of the bar, their voices mixing in the morning air as they made plans to meet again, to support each other, to build something lasting from the bonds they had discovered in the darkness of a dive bar. Torres appeared at Riley's shoulder, his presence as steady and reassuring as it had been all those years ago when he was teaching her how to be a soldier. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "the Army has a program for veterans who want to get involved in community outreach, helping other soldiers transition back to civilian life." Riley raised an eyebrow. "Are you offering me a job, Master Sergeant?" "I'm offering you a purpose," he replied. "A way to take everything you've learned, everything you've survived, and use it to help others find their way home." The idea settled into Riley's mind like a seed finding fertile ground. For 3 years, she had been drifting, existing but not truly living, carrying her guilt and grief like stones in her pockets. But standing here in the dawn light, surrounded by people who understood her story because they carried their own versions of it, she felt something she hadn't experienced since the day Marcus Cross died in her arms. She felt useful again, needed, part of something larger than her own pain. For 3 years, she had defined herself by what she'd lost. Now, surrounded by these faces marked by their own battles, she began to see herself through what she could give. "When do I start?" she asked. Torres smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "How about Monday morning?" As the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Riley Mason stood on the sidewalk outside Steelworks Bar and felt the weight of 3 years begin to lift from her shoulders. Not disappearing, the memories would always be there. The scars would always tell their story, but transforming into something she could carry with pride instead of shame. She pulled out her cracked phone and looked at the team photo one more time. Marcus Cross smiled back at her from the screen, his arm around her shoulders, his eyes bright with the confidence of someone who believed in tomorrow. "I kept my promise, Cross," she whispered to the morning air, her voice carrying the weight of 3 years' worth of unshed tears. "I brought you home. And now I'm going to help bring the rest of them home too. Not from battlefields, but from the isolation that kills us one by one." The dog tag caught the sunlight as she slipped it into her pocket. Its weight felt different now, not the crushing burden of failure, but the steady reminder of brotherhood that transcends death. Some stories never make the evening news. Some heroes never get parades or medals or recognition beyond the quiet gratitude of those whose lives they touched. But in the end, perhaps that's enough. Perhaps the real measure of a soldier's worth isn't found in the history books or the official records, but in the hearts of those who remember, those who carry on, those who refuse to let sacrifice be forgotten. Riley Mason walked toward her truck as the sun painted the world in new light. No longer alone, no longer lost, finally ready to come home. Every veteran has a story. Every service member carries memories that shaped them, challenged them, and sometimes broke them. But they also carry something else, the unbreakable bond of those who have served, the understanding that no one who has worn the uniform ever truly stands alone. If you know a veteran, take a moment to listen to their story. If you are a veteran, remember that your service mattered, your sacrifice was not in vain, and there are people who understand what you've been through. Some heroes wear their medals on their chest. Others carry them in their hearts, in the lives they've touched, in the brothers and sisters they've brought home. Honor them all. The next time you see a veteran sitting alone, remember Riley's story. Sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is simply ask, "How are you really doing?" and then listen, really listen, to the answer. Because every veteran carries invisible dog tags, weighted with memories of those they couldn't save and those they brought home. Every story matters. Every burden shared becomes lighter. Share this story if you believe our veterans deserve more than silence. Help us honor the Riley Masons of the world, the silent guardians who carry their brothers and sisters home, one story at a time.